Hello, everyone. I hope you can all hear me right now. And welcome. Thanks for joining us in today's very special webinar on COVID-19 and young people's role in rebuilding the future. I'm your moderator. I'm Melody Kaya. I'm based in Germany, and I am representing right now the Europe region for this whole dialogue that we're going to have very soon. I'm the Humanitarian Affairs Regional Focal Point at the United Nations Major Group for Children and Youth. And I'm also the curator of Global Shapers Berlin Hub, which is a part of the Global Shapers community. It's an initiative of the World Economic Forum. And I'm also the Assistant Secretary General at the International Youth Federation. And we wanted to, bring a lot of people from different backgrounds and different countries together to help us make this an inclusive dialogue together. And as said, I will be representing Europe. And as you might know, Europe has the highest number of reported COVID-19 cases, exceeding 1.5 million reported cases, and also around 150,000 deaths. And we know that COVID-19 is a very democratic. In theory, it is not, nobody's spared from it, but we also know that the treatment, however, is not that democratic, meaning that the poorer and more vulnerable groups have more issues in accessing the healthcare and information. And just as an example, before we kick things off, I wanted to share what do we do with young people in Europe. We try to actually divide our actions in 3 groups. We try to build knowledge by bringing experts like such in this one together to virtually inform people. We try to amplify the trusted information and debunk myths like, oh, drink, bleach, it's going to help you get rid of COVID-19. We try to debunk this kind of myths. And we also try to increase collective action to support public systems and, as mentioned, the more vulnerable groups. And I'm pretty sure that we all have seen countless numbers of webinars in the last 2 months on COVID-19. However, not many of them focus on young people's role in it, which is a bit interesting for us because young people are not only not the generation which is the most affected by COVID-19, but they're also the ones who will be rebuilding the future after COVID-19. That's why we wanted to organize this session on youth role around COVID-19. And our organizer is Road to Rights. It's an international youth-led organization established in 2019 by Asham Pereira, and it's aimed at supporting and empowering young people. In 2018, it actually received United Nations Sustainable Development Goals Action Award for contribution towards sustainable development. And right now I want to introduce our great speakers from across 6 countries. So first one is Karol Arambula. She's from Mexico, and she's the founder of My World Mexico and civil society representative to the United Nations. And we have Chiagozie Udeh from Nigeria. He's the chairperson of the Executive Global Board for Plant for the Planet, and he's also the Global South focal point of YOUNGO, the Youth Constituency to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. And we have Chaima Burji, winner of the United Nations SDG Action Award in 2018, and also chairwoman of the International Youth Council Morocco chapter. And we also have Dr. Olga Matveyeva. She is an associate professor at the National Academy for Public Administration, and she's also the country director at Global Peace Chain. We have Sailesh Singhar from India. Sailesh is the founder of Youth of India movement, and he is also the G20 Youth Summit Indian representative. And we also have Dr. Nirmal De Silva from Sri Lanka. He's an entrepreneur, he's an impact investor, associate professor in business, and he's also a women and youth empowerment advocate. So we have a very good list of speakers for you. And right now, I just want to give a few ground rules. We're going to go through a few questions, and then we're going to take your questions at the end of this discussion in the last 20 minutes. And if we fail to answer those, if there are so many questions, we're going to get back to you offline. You have all the information from us, and you're going to get emails from us based on this, based on the questions that we couldn't answer. So my first question is gonna be to actually all of these amazing panelists. So I just wanna ask, like, can you talk about the role of youth in nation building, resurrecting economies, and maybe can you share a few success stories? So do you wanna, who wants to go first, or do you want me to?
Okay, maybe I can start first. So hi, everyone. First off, thank you to Melody, to Ashan for the invitation, and to all the attendees that are present here with us. I'm very, very happy to be amongst you and to be amongst such a diverse panel of great leaders, some of which that I know. So first off, actually, the first question is one that is very important and that is very interesting. So how can youth actually play a role in nation building ahead? But the thing is that I believe that we need to talk about it from a perspective of a now, not just the future, because the pandemic is still happening. Coronavirus is still in our countries. It still has a lot of victims. So first off, maybe we need to address the role of youth currently in addressing the pandemic before thinking about what would be the role of youth in nation building afterwards. And in that sense, I actually was trying to see what's happening in Morocco, my country, but at the same time in the region, in the MENA region that I come from. And I noticed that youth actually have been taking a lead with a lot of initiatives. So the action of youth has been mainly throughout 3 axes. First one would be with information. As you'll notice, there's a lot of fake news happening. And this is something, Melody, that you've mentioned, the fact that there are a lot of fake news around medicines, around the spread of the pandemic, around the symptoms of the pandemic, etc. And one thing that youth have been doing, including in my country, was to verify the information, to amplify it, and to democratize access to it. The thing in Morocco is that fake news spread mostly through WhatsApp, while official media are usually communicating through Facebook Live, for example, or even on TV, etc. So one thing that youth did is that they started an initiative to try and verify the news. One initiative that I can speak about is called TIIKM, which was started by one young person who gathered a team very fast and tried to actually come up with solutions or try and verify the news and then spread them through WhatsApp, which is one of the main means through which fake news spread. So that's the first one. So verifying, amplifying, and democratizing access to information. The second thing was initiatives to actually help families in need, because a lot of families are working in the informal sector and now we're in complete lockdown. So everyone is staying home, no one can work. And if you happen to go out of your house, you're gonna have to pay a fine. So one thing is that the government tried to actually support those families, but youth as well have tried to start initiatives in order to gather money to help families or even gather money to support certain initiatives or projects, etc., including through crowdfunding, which was really interesting because a lot of initiatives have even surpassed their initial goals and have been able to support a lot of families in need, especially those working in the informal sector. And the third thing that I've noticed a lot of youth have been doing in Morocco, which is spreading knowledge. So a lot of us have a lot of resources. I'm pretty sure if we just take this panel and we ask each of them what is something that you're really good at, we're gonna have a lot of disciplines, a lot of centers of expertise. So one thing that a lot of people started doing in Morocco, for example, was to start learning initiatives online. So for people to just learn new things, spread knowledge, etc., and build the capacity of youth. So there are a lot of initiatives around that. And I feel like these are things that actually are going to help us in the future. But besides that, youth can actually participate in nation building if they are included, not just by them taking initiative, but by government including them in the pandemic responses committees, for example, on economic, social, and political level. At the same time, if they happen to be included in bringing in their ideas, I don't know, maybe organize hackathons for youth to bring in their ideas into the table. Maybe they can also be included by participating directly in consultations on how to address the pandemic afterwards. But before we address the nation building afterwards, I think we need also to focus on youth right now and given a proper role to youth in addressing the pandemic currently.
Thank you, Chaima. So now I want to go to Sailesh. If you can unmute yourself and yeah.
Right. Yeah, first of all, I think I would like to wish my dear friend Ashan for inviting me here. And on this special day, of course, which is the Vaishak. So happy Vaishak to all the Sri Lankans and the South Asians joining in with us. I would like to start, when we talk about the role of youth in a nation building, I think particularly as our friend and a colleague just shared, youth, we need to focus now. However, it is also a fact wherein I think as a process of building a nation at this time of pandemic, which is wherein we have to rethink and relive our entire aspect, what is very crucial is that we stand up to share the positive or create a positive awareness and make sure, as shared earlier, in the fake news are not propagated ahead. In terms of a lot of success stories that I have witnessed and been part of, I would like to share that one of our team members, when we realized that we have a lot of challenges in and around for the pandemic specifically, there was something that really came up with this recycled and reused plastic material, which you could use it as a shield. So it is a celebration of, I think at this moment for the rebirth of how it should move ahead. And as a matter of fact, when we realize that it is a moment for all of us to go inward, as very rightly said, if you can't go outside, you go inside now. So it is a time for all of us to experience the self within, and that is how the foundations of how young people can lead the nation could really stand up to.
All right. Thank you so much. I want to go to Dr. Olga Matveyeva and ask about her opinion on this.
Hi, everyone. I'm honored to represent case of Ukraine here. So I would like to add to previous speakers that the role of youth is in expressing their unique point of view in Ukraine, providing vision on how our normal traditional processes are going on. And the combination of knowledge, values, attitudes, and skill is unique. It is about youth. When we add here our experience, we have experienced professionals who are well aware of systemic rules. So he's a system player. That is why voice of youth is of great importance in societies which are transitional, as Ukraine is. So the youth in Ukraine is now main driving force of social changes, economy rebuilding, and also environmental protection due to openness and their energy. And youth is the only social strata being fully engaged in education process. So it is open to searching for better decisions. That is why youth is a main driving force of reforming in Ukraine currently. It is most flexible economic group also, because young people are not limited by family, by workplace responsibilities. And what about particular case of Ukraine? Our young managers rebuilt communities in Ukraine during last 5 years before COVID. Couple years ago, public administration system became opened for young professionals. After decades of centralized governing and orientation on lifelong serving, where the career on such places was impossible for young professionals. So weaknesses of the new system was mainly in gaining professional experience by such professionals. And on the other hand, we obtain fresh new system of decision making, fresh new system of public administration, public management, which is now highly responsive to current needs and open to innovations. The same thing with the economy of Ukraine, which is currently provides transition from post-Soviet system to market-oriented and striving to be in European Union. So youth attraction here, it helps to progress with sustainable development goals achievement. So that is why empowerment of youth is of great importance for each society, for each country. Thanks.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Olga. I want to now move to Mexico. Carol, do you want to go next?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for the invitation. I'm going to share a couple slides with you in order to kind of like put together and give you an idea of what is going on in Mexico. I'm actually currently based in Colombia, so I have a wide perspective of what's going on in North America, where Mexico is based, as well as in South America at the moment. So the pandemic caught me here. My Room Mexico, it's the only initiative considered by the UNFCCC Action Campaign as a national movement focused on reminding people, not only young people, but just people across and organizations across sectors, of the importance of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. And when I talk about COVID-19, I like to go back to different promises that we made in 2015 that had been warning the international community about what was going to be happening if we would not address certain issues, especially those related to climate change, water and sanitation, energy, decent jobs and economic growth, infrastructure and innovation, of course, reducing inequalities, as well as changing our consumption patterns and telling countries to go back to their commitments in order to protect the environment. So to us, it's key, certainly key to go back to a commitment, a global commitment that we already made in 2015 that has not only been warning, but has the ideas, has the commitments, and has the ways in which we could finance a better world. So in the case of our country, and My Room Mexico is an initiative that's entirely run by volunteers, including myself. I work for the UN actually here in Colombia, but I contribute as a director and as a volunteer to this initiative, which is what makes it amazing. We've been empowering and giving voices to youth through the help of different initiatives. We have, for example, created a fabric of solutions with a presidency of our country in order to make available the needs of the most vulnerable people and linking those to the public policy scenario. We have worked with, of course, the SDG Action Campaign to continue to tell people that the SDGs are more important than ever before. So we already have a roadmap for policy. We already have a lot of efforts that have come together in order to make the SDGs happen. So we've worked with a campaign to tell people that we need to make this continue to happen. We have joined, for example, Action for Sustainable Development in order to make sure that not only the voices of young people and their needs are being outspread, but also making governments accountable, because you see a lot of cases of corruption in terms of public health, in terms of environmental violations that before that now are more than ever seen. And we have joined other initiatives such as food banks around the country. We joined this initiative that's fortunately here is in Spanish, but it's called Flatten the Curve, in which through different maps, different hackathons, we've been able to impact people and of course link people who are the most vulnerable with maybe someone who could develop an app to know about most of the cases in the country, or maybe food delivery through volunteerism, etc. We developed an app recently with a think tank in Mexico, as well as the Technological and Academic Center of Mexico, which is led by the government as well, in which we're trying to track everyone's different symptoms, especially in the most vulnerable communities, to not only help the medical personnel, but help people know more about the COVID-19 and the impact that this would only have not only on public health, but of course in economic recession. Of course, other initiatives you might be familiarized with the United Nations Major Group on Children and Youth. We have publicized statements and calling to action in different scenarios. And of course, this is something that we did just last week, the last few weeks. We went on an Earth strike. We try to involve, like I said, not only young people, but of course giving a voice to children as well as adults. So that's basically what we so far have done with this crisis.
Wow, Karol, Thank you so much. This was a vivid presentation of what's happening. And I've been hearing the same thing from in the disruptive sense that I think Chima too mentioned hackathons, disruptive technologies. And I do think even that by itself is very innovative in the sense that how young people are actually, rebuilding a more resilient and more, innovative future. So I'm very happy to hear that. And once talking about that, I actually want to go to Udeh to get his opinion on this first question. So.
Yes, thank you, Melody, and thanks, Ashnan, for inviting me here. I think it's very important, as you already mentioned earlier, that young people are able to, to have this conversation and see what we're doing and what we can even do more going forward. In Nigeria, here where I am currently in the capital, there's been a lot of effort by young people. Basically, we have our National Center for Disease Control, where this pandemic really overwhelmed their capacity. A lot of young people have stepped up, to provide digital solution for their websites, to provide digital solution for their communication, and more importantly, a lot of volunteers that are now taking thousands of calls daily from the emergency response center for people, reporting symptoms, or people under personal isolation, or travelers that just came through and maybe suspected someone that has the virus, or people helping with contact, tracing. So the calls were quite a lot, and they needed, support in that area. A lot of young people stepped up to support in that. And then we have quite some group here that is called Follow the Money. So what they do is that they track every expenditure by the government during this pandemic, donations, funds from international donor organizations, and everything that is happening. They're trying to track to be sure that they are being deployed accurately to the right places, and that the people that need them the most are able to get them. Of course, there are challenges in terms of access to information and in terms of access to government documents, but then at least they're keeping it, keeping them on their toes to make sure that everything is, it's being deployed accurately. And of course, in hard to reach areas and amongst vulnerable groups, refugees, internally displaced people, some of them are lacking a lot of vital needs, food, good, hygienic environments, electricity, energy. Sometimes also, especially for the gender part of it, you have, the need for things like sanitary pads and the rest of them. They get to these hard to reach areas, mobilize and try to get to them. And one thing that has been spectacularly outstanding is that, of course, we know that this pandemic has broken a lot of our supply chains. So young people are playing a critical role in rebuilding kind of very informal, supply chains in this emergency to be able to deliver to the very hard to reach areas and places that are indeed in the most need of supplies to be able to, to sustain life and also help in both medical and otherwise response to this pandemic. There are a lot of young people that are producing face masks in Nigeria from local fabrics. I mean, it's been like a new wave, a new boom for that industry here, because they really went into capacity to change they moved their production lines to produce masks so they can, support the much needed deficit in that area. But of course, in going forward, young people would play a critical role, of course, in supporting what will happen next. We've already seen this pandemic has exposed a lot of gaps in our leadership, a lot of gaps in our health system, a lot of gaps in our development. First is that we have to take this opportunity to develop in a green and sustainable way. In our recovery, it has to be making good use of this opportunity, of course, like highlighted earlier, to work according to the Paris Agreement that we have since 2015. And young people have a role to play in demanding that this happens. There are two possibilities where countries may want to go into a race to burn fossil fuel in order to recover very quickly. In the other side, it could be that countries would want to learn their lessons and say, enough of these fuels, let's develop in a green way, let's develop in a very sustainable way that we would not have to get into this crisis or unmanageable crisis again. Those are the two options, and those both options are really things countries are going to take, but we have to play our part to make sure that our own countries are taking, the good measures of recovering in a green and sustainable way. We never knew that things like, flights could be grounded, that economies could be shut down, that the world could just take a pause, and try to recover. And we've seen this now. It only enables us to have even more ambition on what we can demand from our government. And of course, there's been conversation about a universal health coverage, because this has exposed, the kind of role capitalism plays in our economy. A lot of people are not covered. If they're not working or they're on the street, they cannot access healthcare. This is a conversation we need to have, and we need to make sure that people, especially the most vulnerable migrants groups, displaced people, are able to have access to healthcare. In our world today, it should be a thing of shame that people are dying because they cannot access healthcare. We have huge vulnerabilities even in the very developed countries, and we must, address them in here. There will be conversations about globalization and nationalism post-pandemic. At this moment, multilateralism is facing crucial challenges, and we have to really play a big role in making sure that we sustain global cooperation post-pandemic.
Thank you, Udeh. We're going to move on to Dr. Nirmal right now. I'm just going to repeat the question for people who just joined. So we're talking about the role of youth in nation building, resurrecting the economies, and we're asking the panelists to share a few examples from their countries and their region. So Dr. Nirmal.
Hi, everybody. First and foremost, Ayubowan, which translates to long live from Sri Lanka to everybody. Thank you to Road to Rights and Melody for the invitation, this particular panel. Happy to be with fellow colleagues from different parts of the world. So coming back to the question, Melody, in my view, the youth are the future of this world. Make no doubt about it. It's the most important asset that we have in this world as well. So if we can encourage them, empower them, motivate them to be the best version of themselves, that's where we can find innovative solutions to world problems. Now, if you look at from a Sri Lankan perspective, 1 in 4 people of our population are youth, which means they're going to play a significant role in the development of the country. If you look at the current pandemic scenario, I agree with the previous panelists that we at the moment need to control this pandemic, collaborate with different countries, share best practices, and end of the day, we are one world. We need to fight this pandemic together. I think when I look at the mainstream media and digital media, it seems like different countries and different segments are trying to go through this pathway themselves. I think that may not work in the long term, it's not sustainable, etc. Typically, I also see the youth have a huge advantage because they are willing to accept diversity, unlike the previous generations. They are willing to listen to others and collaborate with others as well. So we need to really use this to the best of the advantage. Now, if you look at from a Sri Lankan perspective during the pandemic, just like in most of the other countries, it's the youth who really step forward, whether it's using innovation, whether it's using technology, because when the lockdowns were announced 2 months ago in Sri Lanka, people, irrespective of whether they were in rural areas or in the urban areas, really found it difficult to access essential services. And it was the youth who actually played a pivotal role in terms of creating the supply chains, creating online free shop fronts for SMEs to start doing their trading together. And this particular platform that we have been hosted, TIIKM co-founder actually created a delivery platform called onadeyak.com, which means anything.com, to help people to deliver goods and services, which shows how technology and how youth have been able to come into the forefront. Similarly, we see at the university level and so forth, students coming up with innovative ideas, improvisations for ventilators and personal protective equipment, which was not the case before, but they've been able to quickly come out with innovative solutions. So from my perspective, to answer the question, I think youth has played an important part. However, moving forward, in order to get the best out of their ideas, their capabilities, their connections. We need to provide them an equal platform. B, we need to provide them opportunities. Every one of us have a responsibility to play there. And last but not the least, it has to be inclusive growth. So they have to be used in terms of participating in the overall environment and also being given due recognition. So I think youth are going to play a pivotal role. I'll just give one example from Pakistan as well. So they've done some wonderful work. Youth have come to the forefront and created some telemedicine related technologies, which has been able to take those solutions to the rural and the poorest parts of Pakistan. So we see a lot of things happening in this region. Sri Lanka is right in between Pakistan and India, of the largest economies. So I think we will definitely have a good opportunity to move forwards and build our nations. But the key thing is that we need to unite and work together.
Wow, that's a very strong message. And I believe like what all of our panelists are saying right now is pointing towards that, like the youth is so much involved in the, COVID-19 right now, and they are working tirelessly to actually, create solutions for their local communities and even regional ones in some of the cases. So I'm wondering, as my second question, can our panelists talk about the importance of youth empowerment post-COVID-19 area, with regards to what is the difference between the normal maybe youth empowerment and how is it gonna change or be reshaped after COVID-19? So I want to actually direct this question to Dr. Olga.
Thank you for posing this question to me. Well, let me proceed with the case of Ukraine and our way in this direction. So everything in my country, everything good in my country and progressive starts from grassroots, from the core of civil society and from the youth initiatives. Well, when local initiative or successful case of youth become widespread throughout the country and finally gets reflected in laws on the national level. That is how decentralization in Ukraine works, from top to down, from down to top. It is good for societies where active youth is dominant, but I can definitely say that Ukraine is like this. Vice versa, in a demographic age structure, elderly people are the main group in Ukraine, and unfortunately youth takes only 23%. So the main driving force for change in my country is in minority quantitatively. Nevertheless, its role is indispensable, as it was mentioned before by all speakers today. And COVID-19 faced us and our youth with the new challenges. It still makes our situation unclear and even uncertain all around the globe for individuals and for communities. Well, COVID-19 affected all spheres of public life, including economic well-being, first of all, of youth, and emotional state of the overwhelming majority of youth who are used to be normally free and mobile in everyday life in profession. So the consequences of the pandemic and the measures to mitigate the threat of being infected with also, of course, quarantine regime and regime of social distancing and self-isolation have become especially significant for young women. They simultaneously fulfill the roles of housewife, mothers, teachers, and at the same time professionals on their workplaces. In particular, according to the latest data, the COVID-19 pandemic led to the increase of domestic violence to about 30%, which will be long felt in society. And distinguishing youth's feature is an aspiration for justice and freedom. That is why empowering them is of great importance for each community, for each country. And I would like to stress on youth engagement and empowerment tools through Ukrainian experience. Maybe our approach seems like a chain starting from our common differences intergeneral. to transforming conflicts into development engine through the youth action, because Ukraine is a warring country, unfortunately. And finally, it is compromising and intergender cooperation to the sustainable development goals. And a very important aspect of this process in Ukraine is the digital engagement of youth different campaigns with e-tools for public engagement, starting from raising public awareness to political campaigns. So finally, I would like to stress on public initiatives of youth. It's Ukrainian projects, startups, social businesses, networks, different social platforms, working groups, or volunteering, which are the main driving force for Ukraine during COVID-19. Thanks.
Thank you. I want to move on to Karol because I believe she has a lot to say on this topic. So, Karol.
Yeah, I think that there are many issues that we have witnessed along the way in the past few months, not only the 2 months that have been highly affecting my country. We're right now in phase 3, which means we're at the top of where the pandemic will hit the most, and we're having over 200 deaths every day and over 7,000 infected people. However, one of the things that we're trying to do in the team is to outline what we can do and what we're witnessing that is happening, like with a very wide view. So one of the things that we have rescued in terms of what young people are doing, which I think that will impact what comes next, is the direct delivery and the volunteering that many young people are leading, whether it's from home, whether it's organizing something in their communities, where it's knocking door to door, or driving medical personnel to different areas. I think that's one of the first things that we have witnessed, and that will empower young people a lot, even after the crisis happens. And another aspect is that, like I said, we've been warning about these issues through many, many platforms, especially climate crisis platform and inequalities platform, which include gender inequality. So I think that one of the aspects that we can consider after the outbreak and things easing down, it's accountability and transparency from across sectors, not only from our governments, from our civil society, and also from the private sector, asking them to put into practice actual well-being measures, policies, and frameworks. And I think that one of the things that we're doing actually just now is knowledge building. I think that at least many of us, yes, we're having a lot of struggles, especially mental health problems, which is something that is not as discussed as it should be, I think, when it comes to young people's well-being. But in the other sense, to those who we have access to knowledge building, I think that we're actually taking into account all these different discussions, all these different blog posts, all these different things that we can share through social media. And a lot of people saying and actually putting the eye on, hey, we're not gonna be here to be spreading fake news, and we want measures against those people who are willing to do so. And so it's a time for us to rethink sustainable development, to rethink the way that we're living and the different issues that we have that undergo through sustainable development. And one of the things that we have noticed as a team as well, and as looking at young people at this point of the outbreak, is that many of the things that we usually do not necessarily have to happen with the big gatherings or big massive mobilizations, but we can also help the environment through many of the things that we used to do online, for example. So to me, those are the 4 more important things. I mean, let's take into account, and I'll go really fast on it. This is the Decade of Action year, the Decade of Action in which we're supposed to come together as a global community to tell governments and tell all of those that we need to, that we're watching, that, for example, many of the targets from the Sustainable Development Goals that we were supposed to comply within this year, 2020 deadline, are not going to be met. For example, the Convention on Biodiversity, which is highly linked to what's going on with COVID-19. And not forgetting that there's some interlinkages in sustainable development, which include climatic and environmental conditions, how this impacts in our societies, as well as in our economies. So in order to do that, we need multilateral cooperation, and those are especially coming from young people. I mean, we could have a lot of discussions on the different ways that this is impacting, especially multilateral processes that are watching the SDGs, which is the only roadmap that we have right now in order to combat the crisis and in order to prevent many of these things happening. One of the examples that I always talk about in the team is that we had Malala 5 years ago at the plenary of the General Assembly of the United Nations, asking governments and asking the private sector and everyone to make this promise fulfilled by 2030. And then we have another set of young people telling us that we haven't acted enough, that we haven't done the things that we need to do. So I think that one of the things that we could take advantage of in the upcoming months and in the time of reflection that we have right now is to see how young people are gonna be the leading mobilizers of what comes next. So that is my perspective.
Wow, that was a lot to take in. Thank you for sharing it, Karol. And we actually got comments on your presentation, so you might want to share it after the webinar. So I'm moving on to our next question. So we've talked about a lot of things on capacity building and skill development of youth. So I want to ask, what do you think is the role of capacity building and skills development of youth to tackle the future challenges? And I want to direct this to, obviously, Dr. Nirmal. You're on mute. Still on mute. Until Dr. Nirmal can actually fix his microphone, Udeh, can you maybe step in and share your opinions on this?
Yeah. Thank you, Melody. I think yes, of course, we will need a lot of adaptability in terms of capacity building going forward. We will need a lot of adaptability and flexibility on the skills that we already have, as this pandemic is gradually or very rapidly showing. A lot of things will change, and will change for either good or for bad. Of course, now we know a lot of work that we we are told we can't do from home, we are doing them perfectly from home. I've been working from home for the past 7 or 8 weeks now, and I can tell you, like, I work even more from home than I do in the office, because of course I have to help out my colleagues who are not that's tech savvy, and I have more lot of work, and I think my colleagues even feel more responsible to reply to emails and meet up their daily tasks when everyone is working from home, because everything is sent over the email. So we now know that a lot of meetings that we are going for, we have to fly everywhere to. Some of them could actually be emails. Some of them could just be a webinar, which is more inclusive, which has more people involved, which you don't have to pay flight tickets for, and you do a very massive consultation. So in terms of those, we really need to be adaptable and flexible in terms of the work we do and the skills that we get. We have to learn new skills, obviously, and we have to really learn and unlearn at various stages, because the world we're going into will revolve around adaptability to different situations. This is one pandemic. There could be other ones coming, and we have to be ready for the next one. This has taught us about the vulnerability in our supply chains, about the vulnerability in our health systems, about the gaping holes in the most vulnerable areas, and we really need to learn from that. Again, also, and very crucial, especially for developing countries, is that data literacy and collection. In most developing countries, they're having even more of a challenge, to contain this pandemic and even the measures that they're implementing. For example, in Nigeria, it's been really hard for the government to implement a lockdown measure when they are not giving palliatives to the citizens. And how can they give the palliatives? Okay, first is that they don't have enough resources, but beyond resources, the government do not know how many people are living in Nigeria. They don't know the accurate number of the population. They don't have their data, like, you know, their age range, when they were born, what are they doing, just like you have in developed countries. They don't have this data, so they absolutely don't know how they can reach these people. And even the ones they would have would not be that inclusive. It could be like, you know, just a data of some people in some programs, or data of people that have bank accounts, when you know that a majority of our population, especially people in the rural areas, they don't have bank accounts. They are majorly in the informal sector. And how do you capture them? So a big lesson this has taught us is that we need data literacy, the ability to gather data and ability to interpret this data to use it for development work. It is an underrated skill, but it's absolutely crucial. We cannot develop the way we want, especially in developing countries, if we do not have this data. Of course, also, we cannot rule out, you know, the importance of e-learning. It has come very handy at this time. Of course, there could be questions about efficiency and how much we can sustain that. But you could see a lot of people who are building e-learning platforms, who are building, you know, who are, okay, of course, taking advantage of it, learning new courses, building their capacity. Some actually took some online courses from WHO to be able to help out, you know, the shortage or deficit of health workers during this period. That couldn't have been possible some years ago, but now we have this e-learning, and it will continue, you know, to grow going into the next years. Apparently, digital skills will continue to be in high demand, and it is encouraged that everyone should get this skill. Of course, it will be like a wave. It's already started. It's in high demand for a lot of companies, and this skill will define to a very large extent, you know, how we operate in the next few years. Digital skills, tech savviness, artificial intelligence, coding. It's really, really essential. At least the basic knowledge of this will be really important for young people going forward to be able, you know, to tackle the next pandemic. For example, now in terms of delivery has taken a new turn. A lot of companies are delivering with robots. They just put in, you know, the orders, put them in the robotic box and send it with the address on it, and it drives through and delivers for people to pick. So these are innovation coming through from young people, and they are all digital. And going forward, we'll be looking at replacing human labor, you know, with robots and technological efficiency that reduces cost of production apparently, but also increases efficiency in some ways. So this is a very essential skill that we need to have. A lot of last mile delivery, logistical delivery has happened through the use of technology at this point, and we will have to sustain that, you know, going forward. That will be a really crucial skill for young people.
Thank you so much for that, Udeh. I just want to now try to move on to Dr. Nirmal again.
Yeah, Melody, sorry about that technical glitch.
No
and the
worries.
screen got frozen on me. So I think it's a very important area, Melody, that we are discussing about when we talk about skills development and capacity building. And I tend to agree with Udeh a lot on the fact on how we want to get about it. But I want to take this discussion into a slightly different perspective. Skills development and capacity building was relevant even prior to COVID-19. And it will be even more relevant post-COVID-19 as well. Now, if you look at it from the Sustainable Development Goals, like poverty alleviation, sustainable livelihoods, etc., skill development and capacity building is extremely critical. Now, if you take a Sri Lankan example, we had the GCE O-levels in the month of December, and a total of 556,256 students sat for their O-levels. Whilst there were 10,386 students who got all 9 A's for all 9 subjects, we unfortunately have 8,386 students who failed 6 or more subjects. Now, this is 8,000 plus Sri Lankan youth who unfortunately failed a competitive exam. Now, just because you fail a competitive exam does not necessarily mean that you'll fail in life. There are different avenues and different pathways that people can go into. So policymakers, senior leaders need to understand what are the options available for the youth in case that they can't go through their preferred pathway. That's extremely critical. So when you look at a small country like Sri Lanka, in comparison to most of the other countries who have natural resources and so forth, our biggest strength is our knowledge workers. We got a high literacy rate in the region, in the world for that matter, but we still need to be able to get our youth to understand what are the jobs available in the future, what are the skills required, what are some of the problem solving and creativity oriented skills that are required. And Sri Lanka, unfortunately, in comparison to some of our regional peers, have been quite slow to adopt STEM related education. Now, with the advent of technology and the disruption that is happening with technology, STEM related education is the only way forward. We need to actively promote this. We see a lot of social enterprises coming into it. In Sri Lanka, whilst education is a right, there is access to education. Unfortunately, the quality of education is not standardized across the country. Now, with technology, if I take a very simple example, you can be in an elite school in Colombo and you can live stream like what we are doing, the same lecture, the same tutorial to a rural part of Sri Lanka using large screen TV and internet technology. We are one of the most penetration high countries when it comes to internet, at least per capita, and in terms of smartphone usage and mobile usage also among the best in the region in terms of per capita. So these technologies need to be used if we are to really build the capacity and the skills of people. Finally, Melody, to this question, the post-COVID-19 scenario, if we are to match skills with the demand available, we need to have a holistic process. It can't be just done overnight. It has to have careful planning. It has to have a multi-stakeholder engagement. And again, I need to reiterate the importance of collaboration. It's no point reinventing the wheel. If something is happening well in a different country or a geography, replicating that, getting the assistance will be far more quicker way to adapt and implement it as opposed to trying to do it new. So I think policymakers have an important role to play, and it has to be a multi-stakeholder process if we are to build the skills and the competence.
All right, thank you for that answer. So, we're talking about the young people, obviously, and we know that they have a lot of potential. But my next question would be, considering that, young people, youth are we don't have the highest social capital. We are just starting from the very bottom, and we're still trying to make the change happen. So I am wondering, how can the youth be a catalyst for change, even though our social capital is not going to be the same with a senior policymaker? So I want to direct this to Sailesh.
Right. Thank you so much, Melody, for the question that you have put. And I think it has actually given us an opportunity to be the catalyst to change, rather to say, as we consider, we see that crisis is not a crisis. Rather, it is an opportunity to prove our worth. So having said that, when we see how can young people be a catalyst to change, or rather say, how can we, see in a dimension of how young people can catalyze this in the terms of leading sustainable development goals. As my friend Karol had just mentioned, that this is a decade of action. If this is the decade of action to say, has it not the entire COVID given us in a direction to redefine how do we want to achieve the sustainable development goals? Because when we see, in my place itself, I witnessed that the environment and the climate has changed just fantastically, amazingly in the past 6 weeks. And it must have happened in each and everyone's region as well. We have beautiful sunsets and everything. As anonymously a poet had said, what is this life full of care where we have no time to stand and stare? I think this has given us as an opportunity to stand and stare at the beauty of the environment. And when we say that the SDG 13, the climate action, has not COVID in itself redefined in the climate action by in itself. So if nature heals in itself, if that is a reality and a truth, I think young people would just be mobilizers and facilitators in achieving sustainable development goals, because the catalyst would be the nature in itself. This COVID, I believe, has given us an holistic understanding of sustainable consumption as well. When you're locked down at homes and you don't get a chance to go out for a Coke or a pizza, you just don't have a choice. You just have to restrain from not consuming it. And there are a lot of other aspects as well, into different other things as well. So this has also given us to see how sustainable consumption could also happen. I think what we really need to take from this COVID is, or from this entire pandemic across the globe, is that how do we redefine our lifestyle and how do we accept it post-COVID as well? Just give an example, back in one of our regions in the country, when the state was opened up because there was no COVID cases that was found, the people again came down with the same aspect, with the same thought, thinking that nothing has happened. So what we really need to do is we need to take what we learn from now and lead it ahead. Because 3 things which are going to come ahead with this entire mobilizing of young people is about the accountability. This has given us a chance to hold governments accountable, to advocate for free investments in R&D. Can we hold more accountable people? We need to see how we can take our sustainable solutions back from the villages. Because for India, as Mahatma Gandhi, and it's 150 years of celebrating Mahatma Gandhi, he had once said that to know India, you need to reside in its villages. And villages have sustainable solutions to say. How could we take those sustainable solutions when we talk about leaving no one behind as well, for nature, for planet? So all of these is an opportunity for all of us to rethink how we want to achieve the SDGs at the moment. Because this pandemic is an example to realize that there are other ways and other outlooks to achievements of SDGs as well. So one of our examples that we really initiated, back to the previous question about the skills, we started this program called Desi MBA, along with 1 million for 1 billion, and wherein we would provide skills to people across the villages, especially to the unemployed people, the people who would lose jobs because of this, because of the artificial intelligence that would pump in. There would be a lot of unemployment that could also be generated. So it is essential that we as young mobilizers, we as people who have been advocating about SDGs for a long time, take this aspect to those who have been left out for a long time, because this digitalization, or rather to say, we are connected across the globe now with just 1 click on the Zoom. So it is important that we connect with everyone who have been left out for a long time now, realize that develop methodologies, maybe through apps or maybe through some other digital platforms that can help us to make sure that by 2030, as young people, starting from today, with the decade of action that we have, we take SDGs right at the grassroots level, right where SDGs have never been reached out, or where the entire idea about SDGs have been vacant and have been left out. And once we do that, I think as of now, once we reach 2030, I'm not sure if we would still be called young, but however, the catalyst, the seed that we bore today would be seen in the next 10 years. Because when we plant a tree now, we don't really bore its fruit in the next 6 months. It takes time. So I'm sure as young mobilizers today, redefining and rethinking everything has been essential with this COVID-19. Thank you so much.
All right, I want to move on to Chaima for her perspective.
Okay, well, I've been listening a lot to everything that you guys have said, and I love how everyone tackled the SDGs, how a lot of you talked about the world changing, how a lot of things are happening right now, and what youth can do. But I think the one thing that the pandemic actually taught us is that it reminded us of the motto of the SDGs, leaving no one behind. The pandemic left no one behind. And I feel like if youth want to be a catalyst of change, we in our role as young leaders should again leave no one behind. I mean, coming back to the question of capacity building, skills development, for example, today a lot of youth are talking about how can we build skills together, how can we build our capacities. But the thing is that today with the pandemic, we noticed that not only youth need their capacities to be built, but a lot of other people. And the problem with that is that there is a huge intergenerational gap that didn't allow actually a sharing of skills, a sharing of capacities between young people and seniors. So that's one thing that actually youth can take initiative on to be a catalyst of change. First off, try and break that gap, that intergenerational gap between youth and seniors. One other thing that the pandemic taught us is that it is necessary to break the tie with policies, aligning with the framework of circumstantial remedies. This environment health sector and the economy. And it's the same thing that is happening also when we tackle youth problems, because usually what's happening is that we come up with policies that include youth, which are not taking into consideration the reality of young people. And I feel like for youth to be a true catalyst of change this time, we need to actually advocate for youth to be considered as a stakeholder, as a part of the stakeholders that feel the problem, but also can be part of the solution. And one of the things that were coming up actually a lot were, for example, online learning, how can youth play a role in that? How can youth also help catching up with the fourth industrial revolution? There is a study actually, according to the World Economic Forum, that says that 60% of students that actually enrolled this year will be having jobs that are not existing right now, which means that the world is changing pretty fast. But I feel like youth can easily adapt to that. So again, today, the youth have a role in trying to shift their own environments or their own communities to tackle or to foster their abilities for them to also follow that change in order for us to all go together, again, leaving no one behind. And one of the things that is very important to keep in mind is that it's true, there are a lot of good initiatives happening, especially in response to the COVID-19. But the problem is that most initiatives are happening and will be finished right now, which means, for example, we're trying to fix the problem as it is right now. Okay, we're noticing that a lot of families are working in the informal sector. So, okay, we're going to give them money for them to survive the pandemic. But that doesn't solve the problem. Youth can have a systematic approach and a systematic role in advocating for the change of systems, for the change of laws, changes of regulations, for us to actually tackle the problems from their roots, not just from their facade on how can we improve the problem in the front row, but for it not to be actually fixed in the root. So these are a few things that actually youth can be doing from now on. But one thing that I want to mention is that we need to also elaborate a framework that allows you to do that. And I want to go back on some of the questions that were in the Q&A. One of the questions were, okay, so how can we tackle unemployment after the pandemic ends or post-COVID? Some of the things that we can do is to encourage young people to be entrepreneurs, for them to start their own startups. We can also create special frames for them to be self-entrepreneur, which is something that's happening in Morocco. So for example, if I'm an artist, I have a self-entrepreneur status, I can also issue invoices, etc., which would help a lot of young people get jobs without necessarily working in the typical formal sector, in typical companies or in typical organizations. But the problem with that is that we need a framework that protects young people and that allows them to do that. Again, one other thing to tackle unemployment would be crowdfunding. if we can have actually a regulation around crowdfunding, we can support certain projects that are led by youth or that are intending to help other young people. But the thing again is that there should be regulations that align with that. So even though youth can be a catalyst of change by taking initiative, they can never do it unless they are being systematic, unless they advocate for the change of laws, of regulations, and unless seniors in senior position or in decision-making position actually support them to do so. And that would be actually the biggest challenge that's happening. But I feel like COVID-19 right now taught us that we should not leave anyone behind, and taught us that youth can have a really big role in supporting the response to the pandemic, but also post-COVID-19. So these are a few of the ideas that I have.
Thank you, Chairman. Also, thank you for answering one of the Q&A questions there. So that was impressive to combine those. So now I'm moving to last of my questions, and we're going to open it up for the Q&A part. And I have, the question is that, what are the unique future challenges and opportunities for the youth in terms of positively impacting their communities? I would like to ask you to stay under 2 minutes because we're already a bit behind the schedule. So this question firstly goes to Dr. Nirmal. You're on mute.
Thanks, Melody. So basically, I think it's a bit of a broad area. Just like any pandemic, this may not be the last pandemic that we will ever see. So there will be future challenges coming in as well. And on this Vesak Day, I thought of taking a quote of Lord Buddha, where he said, "The mind is everything. What you think, you become." I think it's very relevant to the youth as well. In my opinion, and in my humble thinking, I think the youth can be more adaptable, as one of the previous speakers mentioned before. And this is an era of survival of the most adaptable, not survival of the most fittest, like what we used to say before. And with adaptability means that you need to be more coordinated, you need to cooperate with the others. The youth have a unique opportunity there. So whether it's in terms of entrepreneurship, I'm a firm believer that one of the ways and one of the sustainable ways of encouraging youth and empowering them is by getting them to look at entrepreneurial ventures and having that mindset. Similarly, I think from a technology perspective and innovation perspective, we need to encourage youth to be creative as much as possible. One of the questions that I also saw, which has been posted, is what are some of the suggestions that we can give youngsters to be positive? I think in Sri Lanka, we saw a huge focus in terms of replanting trees during the lockdown scenario. Majority of these were driven by youth of Sri Lanka, and we saw huge positivity there. So things like that, whether it's art and crafts, whether it's music, whatever it may be, there are ways and means of community engagement possible. Youth can play an important role there. The key is to ensure that there is no huge gap intergenerationally and working together. Similarly, in terms of the other opportunities that I see, whether it's education, healthcare, reduction in poverty, and so forth, it has to be at a community level. And once the ideas come at a community level, we need to create a pipeline and a platform that this can come into national level and regional level. I think that's where the world is moving towards. That's where we, as change makers, as policy advocates, need to be really driving that. And again, I can't stop reiterating that it is a multi-stakeholder engagement. We can't do it by ourselves. The youth can't do it by themselves, but we need to allow them an opportunity. So I call this a BEE model. B is that we need to have belief in the youth and their capabilities. The E stands for that we need to encourage them whenever possible. We can't shut down their ideas. We need to provide encouragement. And the last E in the BEE model is we need to execute, which means execution comes through a multi-stakeholder perspective.
Well, thank you for that, Dr. Nirmal. I want to move on to Dr. Olga for the same question.
Thank you. I would like to add to previous speakers about our latest research. We conducted a survey within our new research on gender equality in youth empowerment and the challenges and opportunities for youth during and after COVID-19 in Ukraine. As a result, we became more aware of the actual problems the young men and young women over 20 faced during the pandemic and self-isolation regime, and identified opportunities for them in current situation. In particular, the survey revealed that young women will suffer more from physical, emotional, and economic, first of all, violence, increased volume of household duties, and hindering fulfillment of their professional tasks. And youth is prepared to actively find the solutions, relying on their own capacities. That means, first of all, self-learning for them and mastering new skills, which could be implemented in new economic conditions. We see that economy is changing very quickly, and only youth could foster in this process. So young female professionals will be interested more in learning new tools to be able to cope with the new economic and social after effects of COVID-19. And young men reported that they are most interested in job opportunities and concrete ways to economic well-being provided by someone else, for example, state, also they stated society and local businesses united. Well, 2020 has already tested how young people could work together from intergeneration point of view, as Chamaye told about, and address critical challenges we are facing with how equal now we are and how valuable our skills and experience are in these new conditions, like this was stated in a speech of Dr. Nirmal. Okay. And the work is mostly...
Thank you for that. Can you wrap it up so we can move on? Because we are short on time, so we want to say, yeah, sorry.
Have any time for this? No?
Yeah, so the last half minute.
Okay. Well, the work is mostly distanced and reduced significantly in Ukraine and I suppose all over the world, and opportunities are unclear for everyone. And we all see that societies and governments do not need all this workforce, unfortunately, as before COVID-19. And they need concrete, smart solutions and clearly visible results in form of demanded digital services and products in science, economy, education, and even in healthcare. It could be provided by a narrow group of creative professionals, specialists, and it's dangerous for local and national economies, first of all, which must provide workplaces for all, for a great amount of people. And now we see that COVID-19 will be also associated with digitalization, robotization, and social distancing. So youth is the key group which is currently ready to survive economically in such new condition. And well, intergender cooperation maintains the balance at the moment, then sustainable collaboration is needed most.
All right, moving on to Udeh for his take on this.
Oh, yeah, thank you. I would start by, saying there are a lot of areas where there will be opportunities for young people, to take lead and ideate, going forward. A lot of innovation will be required, apparently. But let's look at renewable energy, for instance. Renewable energy sector is one that is really driving a lot of the emergency response, especially in developing countries, setting up emergency healthcare centers, solar inverters in hard-to-reach areas, mobile energy settings, in migrant camps, in refugee camps, in internally displaced people's camps. And the beauty of this is that in going into the renewable energy sector also, you find that the jobs are more equitable. The jobs created here are more equitable in terms of gender diversity than what you have within the oil sector or within the carbon field sector. So in this area, it has a lot of potentialities and will continue to grow in the next few years. It's one that young people really are playing a key role in and will continue to play a key role in. And when we are thinking about the post-pandemic what more can we do, and what areas are most needed. Food security, it's really essential. As we're suffering from this now, we are seeing that a lot of food is going to waste. They're already wasting, and farmers are struggling, to make their harvest, and even, be able to sell off whatever they get, especially the perishable ones. So we are facing a very big crisis of food security that may really get worse if we are not really careful, how we manage that. So this is also an area where we need a lot of focus, a lot of work from young people in terms of preservation, and also the rest of them, especially in East Africa, where you have even low-cost invasion that is happening side by side with this pandemic. It even makes the situation more scary. Of course, you have very grave requirements for public health professionals, which is really important. Our healthcare workers are really magnificent during this period. We now understand, how much they put themselves at risk to keep us alive. We must appreciate them more, and there is even need to have more. Like, for example, in Nigeria, we only have 42,000 doctors. That's for a country of 200 million people. That's grossly inadequate. And we need to really, build up on this, especially for public health professionals, to have more of them that can, help us better prepare to respond to this kind of emergencies. And yes, just to say lastly, now we have to look at the gains of artificial intelligence, how it can help us to make the world a better place. Of course, with very big caution in terms of safety and application procedures, but we have to explore how AI would help us in a post-pandemic world, which is really in a lot of ways to be able to recover in a more sustainable, more inclusive and more productive way.
All right. Thank you so much. Moving on to Karol.
Oh, I'll just be very repetitive, maybe in what I'm going to say, but let's emphasize the fact that our challenges and opportunities are within the SDGs. If we're talking about climate change, there is already a global agreement that's still 10 years to go from 2020 to 2030. And we realize there are over 1 billion people who do not have access to water or do not have sanitation. That's already in the SDGs. That's already in the commitments that our governments make. If we're talking about gender inequality and how this is affecting even more during the outbreak, we already have the paths to do that within the SDGs. If we're talking about innovation, entrepreneurship, and of course, what Shema said, leaving no one behind, we already have that stated, and we already have the international, local, and national processes and the roadmap again to do that in the upcoming 10 years. To me, it's highly surprising that we have a pandemic as of today. We've been warned about this for many years, but it's funny that it happens when the decade of action it's supposed to happen, when we have a year to mobilize everything. And now we're seeing the consequences of not listening to what we've been saying for years, even before the SDGs, something that we've been saying for 70 years when we talk about sustainable development. So to me, the 2030 agenda and the SDGs are in fact the challenges and opportunities that we have. Everything goes within it. So I think that we most focused on that. Of course, there are some goals such as reducing inequalities. For example, the Guardian just posted yesterday that we might turn the clock back 30 years in terms of global poverty. And we, of course, one of the most effective and the most visual goals that we're seeing that's going to be impacted is SDG 3, as well as education and many others, of course. That's why I insist that having a local, national, and of course, global approach to this agenda and keeping these goals more alive than ever, it's what's basic for me as a challenge and both an opportunity. We don't have to invent something new. We don't, of course, there are things that we have to restructure or maybe mobilize even faster we already been doing, such as a climate crisis. But to me, of course, this is the most important thing that I would stress, and we're happy to share our experiences with the SDGs, our knowledge with the SDGs, and continue to put the focus on that with many of the colleagues that joined the call, and of course with you guys. We met through the SDGs, actually, Shema, Ashan, and some of the people who are in this call. And I think that not being afraid, run for office. If our leaders are not taking into account this agenda, run for office, even if it's at your small town, even if it's at a village. If you don't like what you're seeing in the private sector, join the private sector, just not the man without knowing how things work from the inside as well. I may not agree with many of the things that the UN does, for example, but now that I work for them, it's just like, wow, I understand many of the challenges. So try to get involved in the different scenarios, and of course, try to become not the spokesperson, but the solidarity focus from those who can't, because we're seeing a digital gap, we're seeing a lot of inequality. Inequality is more than evident than ever before. So to me, this is the opportunity that we have to not let this agenda down and the promises we made 5 years ago.
Thank you so much for that, Carol. And I want to move on to Shaima for her opinion on this.
Right. Thank you so much. I would try to keep it short, keeping in mind of the time constraint that we have. I think the challenges and the opportunities that lie ahead of us is rightly what I personally feel is how can young people, or how could the governments also take into investments into MSMEs in developing micro, small and medium scale industries or enterprises, because this COVID will definitely bring a lot of unemployment that is accepted. But how are we going to see, or how are the governments going to realize that the smaller units of investments or the smaller units have to come now to take this, to deal with this entire situation at the moment? One thing that I'm very curious to share, which I really got, really emphasized or got inspired by myself, was one of the continents and islands, they started a digital tourism. Yeah, you got to register yourself through the website that they have, and then you check in, and then the person would go around in the ski biking and take you around the entire mountains and the seas, and then you can get to see the entire the scenery right through digital methods or through your laptop or your cell phone. So I think this is a very important and a crucial aspect that we could see. It is about, I think, very rightly put, that it is how are we going to take this up in the emphasis of tourism aspects, particularly in the aspects of MSMEs, because I think it is you and I who are going to make the policymakers or even the elected representatives decide what has to happen. This pandemic has brought one aspect very clearly, that it is not the elected representatives who would guide us, but it is the young people who would lead them what they need to guide us through. So, we need to make sure that we develop or redefine our entire skills now, because post-COVID, what I'm confident about is how would the traditional skills that we already had match up to the scenario that might be created. That's a hypothetical situation altogether to say that. But can we utilize this time to improvise our skills, or maybe, sharing a very personal example. Yesterday, my younger brother, he tried for a haircut. That's a small skill that I'm talking about, and he did it on me. Initially I was scared, but then when he took that experiment for the first time, and I saw that he succeeded. I am completely presentable at the moment. Yeah. So I think it is about this time to utilize the skills so that post-COVID, you wouldn't regret that you might have missed it, because you never know what's going to take up. So, 3 crucial points that I would just leave everyone with is about redefine your skills, change or accept the lifestyle, the sustainable lifestyle that we have started to live now, and absolutely see how digital platforms could be utilized for everything that we do. because the cost of expenditure for a lot of multinational companies and a lot of organizations as well have reduced down drastically. So can we, connect in future? This could be a very broad or very ambitious thought, but can we have some conferences of UN through digital platforms, and the amount that we save from it, with the actual expenditure that we used to have pre-COVID-19 and the amount that we save post-COVID-19, can we use that amount for reaching out to the developing nations or leading to to connect it with the leaving no one behind, so that the actual resources are utilized and the conferences and the discussions could also take place through digital platforms. So this is what wherein as young mobilizers, we need to take up the digitalization as an aspect to connect with everything that we do in achieving the 2030 that we all envision and we all aspire to see as a world for. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sailesh. So now we are at you, Shaima. Do you want to go?
Well, not to repeat myself, you guys have actually answered the question very beautifully. I want to go back on something that Karol said that I think actually summarizes challenges and opportunities. There are the SDGs. So the SDGs are where lies our opportunities and challenges. However, if I can add one thing, it would be that actually when we talk about youth being a catalyst of change, etc., and when we talk about leadership, generally people link leadership with the fact that you have a decision-making position or that you can influence directly decision makers. Well, leadership is just the ability that you have to inspire others to do more, to take action. And I think all of us can be leaders, especially in this time of in the time of this pandemic. So take on leadership, be a leader, and you don't need much to be that. So inspire others, do actions, and try and engage more and more people with the things that you do. So that's one thing. And I think the biggest challenge in that sense that we would have is the trust, because there is a lot of disruption of trust, either between youth and seniors or between youth and their governments, etc. And I think it's time to rebuild that trust. And that will be the biggest challenge that we're going to have, because unless that trust actually exists, unless the trust is actually a pillar that we can try and build upon, we cannot move forward even after the COVID-19 or after even 1 million years from the COVID-19. We would have not learned our lesson. So the biggest challenge is to build that trust, and to build that trust, it starts with us. So try and be a leader, try and improve yourself, try and engage other people to do more, but also try and have a little faith, a little trust, and try and build the trust that people will have in you.
Wow. Thank you so much for that, Shaima. We are a bit, short on time, but we have so many questions. I will be answering the easy ones and then directing the harder ones to our panelists. So the easy ones would be will there be a recording? Yes, it is also answered online. So you can visit the TIIKM Facebook page or Road to Rise Facebook page after the session to watch it, share it with your friends, or, just go over it to see this session. And the other question was that, will there be certificates? I see that you have, that this came a lot, and I think you can reach out to the organizers after the event, because I will be sending you an email about the, thank you for joining the event kind of a thing, and then you might want to reach out to them. So of course you're going to get something about the confirmation. So now I'm moving forward. One of the questions that I've seen a lot in the chat and also in the Q&A, it is about the mental health. So we know that, everybody is obviously affected by this. And as a young person, when you look around and then you think about your future after COVID, they're like, what is happening? Do we even have the jobs now? What is that? Like, everything is changing. So I want to ask, what is our panelists' view? And we will not be able to go through all of you. So it would be nice if you want to, volunteer to answer this, because mental health is super important. And we've got a lot of questions from the audience. What can they do in this? And even in the cases like domestic violence, it is even, harder to run away from it. So I see that, Shaima, maybe you want to go?
I can try and address it. However, I'm not a professional. I'm just going to tell you what I personally do to try and stay sane in the pandemic. So one thing that I would recommend to everyone is to actually be okay with what you're feeling. I realize this is a pandemic and a lot of people are trying to be productive. A lot of people are trying to work remotely. I myself try to do that, but you can be tired as well of staying home. You can not feel well all the time. You can be unproductive sometimes. So the first thing would be to actually recognize your feelings and be okay with them, because it's fine to go through a lot of stages. And that is very important because we feel under a lot of pressure, especially going on social media, everyone's saying, oh, I'm learning a new language, I'm learning this, I'm gonna, by the end of the lockdown, I'll be doing this. So don't pressure yourself. Try and take it easy. One other thing that I would recommend for people who work remotely, I can send you maybe the link later of a video that I've seen of the World Economic Forum that gives few tips on how to work remotely effectively. Trying, for example, to create the same space at work and at home. Try not to work in, for example, in your bedroom or whatever, but try and have a special space for you to work. Try and have a special space for you to take breaks, because it's not that you're working home means that you have to work at all times and be productive at all times. It's okay to take breaks. It's okay to take time for yourself. It's okay to also call your colleagues usually to just chat about something like you used to do at work. So try and create some of the routines that you have at work at home, and try to have a special space just for work, not work in the same space that you're usually working. One other thing that I can also recommend you during the pandemic for you to stay very, very sane. First off, one thing that was done in Morocco that I think was very effective is that a lot of organizations created groups of support. And a lot of psychologists also are available. So you can call them at any time for you to seek help. So that's one thing. We can also create ourselves as young people, maybe create small support groups in your area or with your community. I try to do that with my organization. So we basically have a call every week as a group and just talk about the lockdown. How are we feeling? What's been happening? How can we feel better, etc. Have games, for example. I mean, try and do activities, not just have meetings and work and like try and be productive. It's okay not to be productive, and it's okay to have fun sometimes. So these are a few things that I personally do. I hope they would help. But yeah, I'm not a professional again.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I want to move on to another question about the generics of this. You know, we've seen this, how a pandemic can affect our planet, and you know, our audience is curious that what are the learnings in terms of protecting our planet better in the next possible scenario like this one. So what did we learn that is going to make us more resilient? Dr. Nirmal, maybe?
So, well, it's an interesting question, Melody. I think what we need to also keep in mind is that it's not only a learning that we need to take note from this pandemic, but it's also a good eye-opener for us to understand what are some of the global level challenges that can happen. And in my opinion, I believe that we need to be more responsible as individuals, as communities and as countries. We need to ensure that we walk the talk, because end of the day, all of this will become rhetoric if we do not put these things into action. It's very, very critical. And ownership doesn't come in only from governments or policymakers. It comes from everybody involved, inclusive of the citizens. I think the second thing to ensure that such pandemics and such challenges don't come is that we need to understand and work on the aspect of humanity. We can't, just because we have differences of opinion or we come from different cultures, does not mean that we can forget we're all humans. The most important race in the world is human race. I think that's the critical aspect. Unfortunately, due to myopic, short-sighted policymakers and politicians, this is an area that is often forgotten. So if we are to overcome such pandemics and challenges in the future, we need to work together. We need to believe in our own selves. We need to believe in our communities. And we need to look at it from a holistic approach as opposed to an individualistic approach. In my humble opinion, again, we should be able to overcome any pandemic if we work together. As one nation, one world, we will have one vision.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Unfortunately, we are out of time. We will be answering the rest of the questions offline. I just want to thank all of our panelists for their great input. And it's just, it shows us that young people are very much involved in rebuilding a more resilient future. And it is up to us to take initiative. And it might be, of course, draining emotionally, physically, but we are, pandemic COVID-19 knows it is very democratic in terms of, everybody's under it, everybody can get it. So we are actually, as Dr. Nirma said, need to act together collectively. So I do think this is a very positive message to end the session. Thank you everyone for joining. Again, we will be reaching out to you offline to answer the remaining questions because there are a lot. So thank you for the engagement, and we do hope that you enjoyed this session.